All right, thank you very much. I'm happy to be with you again, and it's really hard to follow in Jeff's shoes doing this, coordinating, but I'm happy to give it another go. I guess I should speak for about 15 minutes. Is that right? 15, 20 max?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, so I'll give you, there's so much going on that I can really mostly give you bullet point type headlines about what I think are the most significant things going on. The most significant issue right now about the Middle East as a whole is that the Israel-Palestine conflict, which has always been the core conflict in the region around which other conflicts developed, including ideological Cold War conflicts and Iranian, Arab, and other conflicts, monarchies versus democracies, not democracies but republics. But the core Arab-Israeli conflict has now become truly a regional military conflict and has serious global dimensions to it in a way it never had before. I've been following this situation as an adult for about 60 years now, since the mid 1960s, and I've never seen anything like this in terms of the moving parts in so many arenas, which I'll mention one by one. But also the big picture that you want to be aware of is that the different things happening in Palestine and Gaza, the West Bank, in Iran, and Syria, and Lebanon, all over the region, each one has its own local dynamic, and they're all linked to regional dynamics, and some of them have international dynamics. But as you follow this, especially here in the US media, if that's your main source, which it shouldn't be, but you can get Jazeera, you can get Turkish TV, you can get other sources in the US that are more accurate, more complete. But the key thing to remember is that you're being flooded. The world, the public sphere is being flooded with analyses, facts, propaganda, delusions, and deceptions about all of these. Everybody's doing this on all sides. So you've got to be super careful about what kind of information you receive and what you believe and don't believe. And the best way to sort those things out is check with somebody you know and trust who is deeply involved in the region. Jeff, obviously, is your lead source on this, and others among you have done this for many years. So you can help each other figure out what's reliable and what's not. But if we go through I've made five main subjects that I want to quickly mention. The first one, the big issue now, remains the Israel-American joint attack on Iran and the Iranian response. That continues to reverberate and shape many things in the area. And the two main things I would say there is that this is a historic moment when the combined power of the United States and Israel, which militarily and technologically, you can't find two countries in the world that have more power than those two, even though Israel is a small country, but it's very advanced technologically, and the US is a big power with a lot of stuff. And together they make this incredible force. And it was actually checked for the first time, I would say, in modern history, that they went into Iran, they caused quite a bit of destruction here and there against civilian targets, military targets, they assassinated people. They did a lot of things that you know about. But the Iranians held their ground. They fought back, choosing carefully the targets and the time and the instruments of power, what kind of missiles they used, what kind of drones. They fought back, and at the end of the whatever it was, 10 days, I think, the Israelis were really in a very delicate situation. Their air bases were being hit, their technological research centers were being hit. A lot of the destruction in Israel from Iranian missiles that got through their so-called invincible dome were causing serious destruction, and the Israeli people were spending a lot of time in shelters and bunkers and stuff, and a lot of this information was not getting to the world because of the Israeli military censorship. But the point is, the Israelis were really in a tight spot. They were running low on ammunition. The US was feeding them as much as it could, and they needed a ceasefire. Their army was exhausted from almost 2 years of a year and whatever, 8 months, and they were not forcing the Iranians to surrender. And this is fascinating because they've now tried this in Lebanon, they've tried it in Gaza, they've tried it in Iran, using massive military force with huge technological and other advantages, without achieving the surrender that they wanted from the other side, and being forced to negotiate. And in Israel's case, being forced to rely on the US to call the ceasefire. And therefore, this is a big event. We don't know the full dimensions of this over time. But this is probably causing Israel to rethink some of its strategy. It's certainly, I think, causing the US to rethink if it's going to keep giving Israel an open-ended commitment to support it militarily, politically, diplomatically, and in all other ways. Because I think the United States understands the dangers of allowing this kind of war to continue. The Iranians are a foe unlike any that the Israelis have ever encountered in terms of their technical capabilities, their nationalistic determination to protect their country. The Iranians have a mania about foreign intervention in their country going back to the 19th century, but really starting in the early 20th century when the Russians and the British and others intervened and tried to colonize parts of their resources. And then they had the US U.S.-British overthrow of the elected Mossadegh prime minister in '53, and they put back the monarchy. And then the Iraqis attacked in 1988. They had this 10-year terrible war with the West supporting Iraq. And this has been going on. The Americans and the Iranians have been fighting for about 20 years in various ways, shooting down airplanes, assassinating people, whatever. And the Iranians held their ground. And this is super important because I think it's going to force some changes. The Israelis, in the meantime, both the government and the right-wing extremist elements in it have come out with very strong statements saying that we've won, we've achieved this miraculous victory, and we can dominate the region. The Israelis feel they can call the shots anywhere they want in the region, while the reality is not that clear. The Hamas, for instance, which is has been really pulverized in many ways, and all of Gaza has been pulverized, but they're still there. They're still negotiating. They're still holding out for the key point that they want in the ceasefire negotiations. Hezbollah is still in Lebanon. They've been hit hard, but they're now regrouping. They're trying to figure out their best response and next step. These are armed nationalist resistance movements. These are not terror groups they're not like ISIS that came out of nowhere or just funded by some foreign donor. These are armed national resistance movement, people protecting their own lands and countries. And you have to keep in mind there's something in this region that Americans and British and others tend not to understand so well. If you look at the picture behind me on the wall, that big frame picture, that's a dolmen. A dolmen is an Iron Age stone monument. And that's a painting by an Australian friend of ours in Jordan. The dolmens were around in the late Bronze and early Iron Age, around 3,000 years ago. And those were elements of local culture and civilization. And the point about that painting that I mentioned is that the people of this region, especially in big societies that had major cities that once ruled the region or even ruled half the world, like the Persians or the Ottomans or others in this region. So if you go to Istanbul, if you go to Tehran, you go to Cairo, they had a regional empire. You can see these are ancient, powerful civilizations that are not quite as dominant as they were then, but people have this tremendous memory of their past on their land. And when foreigners come and try to force them to surrender or to get out or to leave, they don't. They just hang around and fight back and resist. And if they can't resist, they just hunker down like the people in Gaza, and they know they're going to get killed. But they'd rather die on their own land than to go off somewhere and be forced out. So that's the first main point I would make. The damage that was done in Iran was pretty significant in some parts of the nuclear industry, but obviously the Iranians have taken precautions and they've hidden some of their stuff and they've got extra centrifuges. So they've been set back for some period, but they're still able to go ahead with whatever they want to do with their nuclear research and energy. The Israelis and Americans accuse them of wanting to make nuclear weapons. There's never been real evidence of that. And this is going to go on, this kind of accusation and counter-accusation. But the important point is how people handled this attack by Israel and the U.S. So the Israeli right wing has talked about we want to redraw the area. Smotrich, one of the extremists in the cabinet, says that the Arabs should thank us. They should pay us for doing what we did, for beating up parts of the Iranian system and beating up parts of Hezbollah. They have the sense that they can redraw the map of the region, and I think this is not realistic. The Iranians want to keep negotiating the nuclear situation with the U.S. And just today, the Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, published an op-ed in the Financial Times, and it's worth reading. It's online, saying basically the U.S. has to choose. When it chose negotiations, we reached a deal, and our nuclear industry was monitored, and it was perfectly peaceful. Or the U.S. has to choose whether it wants to go into war that Israel is trying to drag it into. So that's significant that the Iranians want to keep negotiating, and I think this is probably going to happen for various reasons. The other thing that was damaged in the Iran war were the major institutions of international law and governance. The Iranians threatened to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which monitors who has nuclear research, and therefore it's not proliferating into nuclear weapons. They might do that as a threat. We'll see if that happens or not. They're not interested anymore in dealing with the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the UN body that monitored their industry with full Iranian cooperation, because they've seen the IAEA now leaking information to the Israelis and the Americans, which was used to kill some of the nuclear scientists. And then the UN agencies themselves are being threatened. The U.S. today, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of Defense, issued a statement sanctioning Francesca Albanese, the Human Rights Special Rapporteur from the UN Human Rights Council, and they're trying to. The U.S. is trying to sanction the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the ICC. So these institutions that are supposed to protect people and human rights and ensure peaceful cooperation and justice have been badly damaged by what the U.S. and Israel have done. Quickly, the second point: the Gaza, Israel, Palestine situation. The power of the U.S. and Israel together has continued the genocidal assault on Gaza and parts of the West Bank now. This is still going on. 30, 40, 70 people are dying every day by starvation, by being shot, by lack of medicine, different reasons. And the Israelis are trying now, with American assistance, to set up new camps. They call them humanitarian camps. The Palestinians call them concentration camps. This Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that was set up about a month ago to distribute food has been the source of death for 20, 30, 40 Palestinians every day who have to decide, are they going to die from starvation, or are they going to die risking to go get a bag of flour for their family. But the fundamental situation on the ground in Palestine remains as it has been for some time. The dominance of the Israeli military under the Netanyahu government is continuing to kill Palestinians and make life intolerable. They're pushed them out of 70% of Gaza now is under Israeli control, and the Israelis would like to push the Palestinians all the way to the south and eventually force them out. I don't think that's going to happen because, again, the historical commitment and connection of people to their lands in our part of the world is very serious, and it manifests itself in situations like this. You also see important tensions between the political elite and the military in Israel. The military has said we've pretty much achieved whatever we can achieve, and if we keep going, we're going to threaten the lives of the hostages that are still being held. And so that internal situation is something to keep our eye on. The relationship between the U.S. and Israel and the current meetings that just were held in Washington to try to get a ceasefire agreement going. This remains the most important but unclear dynamics in this whole situation. And it's not clear what the United States policy is. The United States under Trump has been an unreliable actor. If it says something and then it changes its mind, it makes an agreement, then it breaks it, it makes a threat and then ignores it. So this is a big problem. Sorry, my cat wants to come here, but I'm telling her to go away. This is a big, the cat came with me from Beirut, so she feels she has certain rights. Oh, there she goes. Go to the window there, Goose. Yeah, let's sit down. There she goes. So the U.S. role in this, the U.S. is the most important actor, but it's also the most imprecise and unreliable actor. So as I said in an interview on Turkish television 2 nights ago, the good news is that the U.S. president is personally involved in trying to achieve a ceasefire. That is significant, to have him involved personally to do this for various reasons. The most important of which is the U.S. needs a Middle East that's not riddled with wars and starvation and destruction and death and radicalism and terrorism and all the terrible things that have been happening. It needs a quiet Middle East to achieve all its important bigger goals, which is economic relations, projects, making money, and trying to reinstitute a kind of new imperial order in which the U.S. dominates the region and the world, but through economic and technological power rather than the old colonial order where the military is moved in. So the U.S. role, the good news is the president is involved. The bad news is also that the president is involved because he's not reliable, he's not consistent, he doesn't have a clear strategy. He wants to make a deal, he's desperate, he wants badly to make a deal, he wants a Nobel Peace Prize. So he's an erratic character. And when you have two people like Trump and Netanyahu, both of whom are indicted for criminal actions, and both of whom are super ego people, and they love muscle flexing and showing their power. This is a volatile combination, so we don't know what's going to happen. They're talking now, it's going to go on probably another week or 10 days, we'll see, but hopefully they can reach a ceasefire. But the important thing to remember there is that they're trying to muscle Hamas to surrender and submit and roll over and give in to everything that the Israelis want. Hamas is refusing to do that. They're prepared to hold their ground until they get what's critical to them, which is ending the fighting and a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire, exchanging Palestinian prisoners for Israeli hostages, and getting the Israelis permanently out of Gaza, and bringing back the humanitarian aid flows to what they were, and then of course reconstruction and all that. So this is something you want to keep your eye on. Will the negotiators, who will blink first? And from what I see so far, from the information that's come out that's credible, both sides are willing to make compromises, but not on their ultimate desires. The ultimate desire of the Palestinians, Hamas and the others, is not to be attacked repeatedly and treated like animals. And be subjected to the things they've been subjected to. They want to live a normal life and to have ultimately their own self-determination and their state. That's for the future. The Israelis' key aim is not to be attacked by Hamas or anybody else, as has happened over the years. The Hamas attacks, of course, Hamas calls them resistance, which they are. The Israelis call them terrorism. So this is an argument that's never going to be resolved. The only way to resolve it is to have a permanent peace agreement that gives both sides their core legitimate aims, which I believe can be done, but we don't have time to talk about that now. So the whole situation in Gaza right now is that we've reached the stage where the U.S. president is directly involved, which is, I think, probably a good thing if he can stick to his position of wanting a permanent peace. And he's given his personal commitment. This is new. He said he would personally guarantee to Hamas that the Israelis will keep negotiating and not go back to fighting after 3, 4, 5 weeks or so. So that's good in one way, but it's not good in the sense that his personal commitment is not worth very much based on his track record, or the U.S.'s track record. The third quick thing I wanted to mention is again the role of the U.S. in terms of its continued willingness to support Israel in everything it wants, including the attack on Iran, which is quite significant. Even though the attack on Iran, as Jeff has mentioned, and I agree, that some of it was theatrical, it was orchestrated, it was designed to send the political message, but not to kill thousands of people, as was the Iranian response. And they've done this before. The Israelis and the Iranians did this last year. But the U.S. is still not clear about what it wants as its final position. What's its bottom line? It seems to be going still now, despite what it says, and you can't believe what people say. You got to look at their actions. The American actions so far continue to be, with you, Democratic, Republican, president, doesn't matter. They continue to give Israel all the support it wants, the military, political, economic, whatever, diplomatic. They've gotten involved in the fighting. I mean, they're always involved in the sense that they provided the equipment, but they also provided intelligence, and now they got directly involved in the fighting. They continue to give Israel. They don't do anything about Israel's settlements and its criminal activities in the West Bank and war crimes and all that. And there's been dozens of new reports that come out around a regular basis by credible international actors saying, well, the Israelis are committing war crimes. The Israelis are having an apartheid system. They're doing genocide. The U.S. ignores all of that, which leads to the destruction of the international system that's supposed to protect people's rights and national security. And now the latest thing that just today was that I said Marco Rubio issued this statement sanctioning Albanese, the Human Rights Commission representative on Palestinian human rights, because of her very good reports about what's going on in the occupied territories. And a fascinating little sideshow here is how the deterioration of the credibility of the U.S. and its Western allies, the British, the French, the Germans, and others, is starting now to face a backlash by the increasing role of the BRICS. The BRICS is this group of Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, India, China. They have 10 members and 10 associate members. They're just meeting this week in Rio de Janeiro. They came out with a very strong statement criticizing Israel and the attack on Iran. This is unusual. So the BRICS are gradually developing into they're mostly economic in their intentions, but they're also now taking on political roles, which is really significant. So you want to keep your eyes on that. The fourth point is the Arabs, the Turks, the Palestinians, the people in the region other than Israel and the U.S. They don't have, and Iran, they don't have a lot of options right now besides just holding their ground and trying to find a negotiated resolution to the conflict, both the Israel-Palestine conflict and the wider Iranian-Israel-Western conflict on nuclear issues. But the Arab countries are all trying desperately now to rebalance their relations with ones that used to be totally pro-Western, like, for instance, Jordan or Egypt or Saudi Arabia. They're not trying to balance their relations. They want better relations with Iran, which they've been doing for a few years. They want better relations with China, with Russia, with other actors. This is a significant slow-motion reconfiguration of the strategic relationships across the region. And this is something that I think is going to continue as, at the same time, the critical military actors on the Arab side and Iran will continue to use their military force whenever they need to on a limited basis. So you have the Palestinians, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad and others. You have Hezbollah in Lebanon. You have the Houthis, the Ansarullah in Yemen, the Iranians. These groups have continued to hold their ground and to demand a negotiated resolution that's fair. So all of this is going on at the same time as they're all trying to rebalance their relations and call on the West to implement its existing laws and rules of war and all of that. And the last point I'd make, which is really probably the most important in the longer term, but least impactful right now, is the role of public opinion. The role of public opinion in the US, in Israel, in Arab countries, in Europe, and in the rest of the world has always been clear. I mean, we know what public opinion feels, especially in the last 20, 30 years when we've had polling and surveys all over the world now. It used to be in the Arab world, we had to kind of guess what people felt. Now there's really credible polling evidence. And all of the trends in public opinion in every part of the world are for a ceasefire in Gaza, for more humanitarian aid, and for a political resolution of the conflict. The only people who are going against this are the Americans and the Israelis, or the right wing of the Israeli society, but they're in the government now. And the United States remains the key player here, even though public opinion in the US continues to evolve gradually in both parties, but more of the Democrats. So you get much stronger support for Palestinian rights, for equal justice for Palestinians and Israelis, for a ceasefire, some people wanting to reduce American military sales to Israel because of the genocide. So that trend is very key, very clear. And you see it all over the world. And the election, the victory by Mamdani in the New York primary was a really serious signal to the domestic American political system that things may be changing for various reasons, even though he didn't make Palestine a big issue. But the point is that the Gaza genocide became a political issue inside the US about a year ago, with the universities and the demonstrations and the elections and Kamala Harris's loss and other things. It contributed to many parts of American political life. And now the Gaza-Palestine issue is a global issue. And the combination of that, given the trends in political opinion among publics across the world, at some point, these public opinion sentiments among majorities of people will impact on the political leaderships. It might happen with the elections next year in the U.S. It might happen. It's starting. You see it with the Mamdani victory. So the elections are the most effective way for popular sentiment to translate into policy changes. So those are the. I'll end there. I don't want to take too much time, but these are the key points I wanted to make for you to keep your eyes on, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if I can. And I'm sharing with you. I think Elizabeth put it on the chat. I think the link to my Substack site where
I'm going to do it right now. Yep.
I put all of my articles and my TV interviews and occasional podcast interviews. I put all this. If you want any more of this analysis, you're welcome to see it for free. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Right, there's one link. So I'm just going to call on Jeff, if there's anything else that you would like to add, if you could just take a couple minutes and then we'll go to questions.
Just a couple of things to emphasize. Thanks, Rami. That was very comprehensive. And I just want to, reinforce this idea, despite all the triumphalism that is being trumpeted by Netanyahu and the White House, Israel has suffered a lot during this war and is not, as a society and as an armed force, is not set up to fight protracted wars of attrition, which it is involved in now. And it's only slowly coming out now how much damage has been done physically and economically to Israel during this 2 years. Since Rami talked about historical monuments, some of you heard mention this before, despite how bad things are in the short run, as they certainly are, and the suffering in Gaza and elsewhere is dire, it's useful to remember that all over the Levant, in Palestine, Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, are the ruins, the very impressive ruins of Crusader castles. The European Crusaders ruled parts of the Levant, the Middle East, for up to 2 centuries. And now what's left are the ruins of their castles that are, very impressive tourist attractions to visit. I visited many of them. I'm sure Rob has too. So taking a long view is helpful to overcome, the despair of the short run. And I think we should all bear that in mind. And one other point that you may be seeing, Israel is recycling its charges of mass sexual atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th and after. And, they're basically, reissuing the same evidence, much of which has been debunked by the Israeli press. Of course, they're counting on people having a short memory. And so just be aware, this campaign is being reinforced all over the mainstream media. And just be aware that a lot of it has been debunked, which is not to say that no atrocities, including sexual violence, were committed on October 7th. That happens in war all the time. That's why war is so bad. It brings out the worst in people who have bad tendencies. But the idea that somehow this was a particularly systematic sexual violence committed by these crazed Muslims is just part of the sort of racist narrative that is used now and in other wars in the past too. It's just a way of justifying genocide. So be cautious about when you read about this. Take some time to look into it. I mean, much of this is reshuffling evidence that had been debunked long ago, and again, debunked in the Israeli press, not by Palestinian partisans. So anyway, thanks, Rami, and
Right.
I guess we should have general discussion now.
Yeah, don't leave, Rami. I saw you waving. I was like, don't leave. Let's go to Julie, and then we'll see if there's other questions.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to Rami and then to Jeff, who enlightens us so much. And I feel like you guys should have like a show or something. Yeah. So anyway, my question is this. Rami, you had said that they want to make money from regular, whatever economic endeavors in the Middle East. Okay. But I feel like they're making so much money by the military. And it's like I don't know. I think Abby once said it's like a jobs program for the U.S. military. It's like, we'll give, this much billion to Israel and then they'll get, our, whatever. Anyway, I don't have to go through it for you. But I'm just wondering why you're thinking that a non-military economy in the Middle East would be more interesting to them.
Well, I think the answer is that it would be both. I mean, the U.S. would continue to sell its military hardware, especially if there is one day a peaceful Middle East. You can expect the Israelis, with their very advanced high-tech knowledge, to work more closely with Americans to keep producing these high-tech weapons and sell them to the rest of the world. But ultimately, the world can't live on an arms sales economy because you're going to run out of people to kill. That's putting it crudely. But the reality is that the amount of profits to be made through business deals with a peaceful Middle East that is in a state of massive underdevelopment, and in some cases de-development. If you look at Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Somalia, Yemen, Iraq, now parts of Iran, there's areas that have been devastated and have to be rebuilt. So there's huge, huge opportunities for contracts, for sales, for training, for human development, education, whatever. And Trump understands that you can make money by making deals with people. And he also understands from his business world, even though he wasn't a very successful businessman, but he has learned, I think, that for a business deal to work, both sides have to benefit. It's like his tariffs now. He understands that you can't just force people to accept these high tariffs, but you make the opening gambit, and then they come back, and then you negotiate. And that's what's happening now. So he understands that there's massive amounts, much bigger money to be made from commercial deals than there is from just selling military arms, because the Russians and the Chinese are becoming more sophisticated in their armaments. And you can see the Chinese arms in Pakistan, for instance, doing really well in warfare, and the drones that Iran is sending to Russia are doing really well in the sense that they're effective. They may be doing terrible things to civilians, but militarily they're effective. So the American money-making machine from the military sector is really limited, and they'll make much more money if they get into civilian projects. And this is the hope and Trump understands that the U.S. has advantages in various dimensions of life, ideology, culture, movies, technology, whatever, that attract people. People keep coming to the United States. They don't immigrate to go to China or to go to Russia. They immigrate to come to the United States because they like a lot of the things the U.S. society offers them. And he understands that this is an opportunity to have a peaceful Middle East, which the U.S. can then dominate in terms of technology and economy. And part of this will be jointly done with the Israelis, but it can only be done according to level playing fields. And this is where the BRICS comes in. This huge group and the Shanghai Economic Cooperation group in Asia, that they're insisting that relations with the West can't be according to the old imperial colonial rules. They have to be mutually beneficial. So this, hopefully, in the best of worlds, this is what will happen down the road.
Thanks, Rami. Other questions? I saw some questions in the chat. Somebody asked, any more thoughts on China's role in West Asia, diplomatically, economically, militarily, etc.?
China's role in the Middle East generally?
Yeah.
Well, the Chinese have a very clear track record, which the U.S. doesn't have, or the British. The Chinese have a clear track record about what they want and how they go about getting it, their strategy and their strategic aims. They understood before the Americans did, I think, the power of economic cooperation. But they used their power to gain advantage, especially in Africa and other parts of the world, where they could go in, make a deal with some poor country and get the use of a port or mineral rights, and at the same time contribute to the development of that country, build a railroad or whatever. It's a bit like the old imperial model that the British and the French did in the 19th century. But the Chinese are more aware that you can only have lasting relationships with people in the long run if both sides benefit. And that's why they've got this Belt and Road initiative with trains and highways going from all the way from Eastern China to Western Europe and going up also eventually to Russia. And they're working on this global network, which is gradually expanding, and the BRICS is being a big part of this. Other countries are involved. So China's role is going to continue to be to play a very low-key political role because that's not in their character. The Japanese are the same. Even at the height of their power, the Japanese never became politically very decisive. They just don't feel you can go intervene in foreign countries' internal conflicts and try to solve them. But they play a role where they can. The Chinese hosted a reconciliation meeting between Fatah and Hamas about a year ago. They came up with this Beijing Declaration, which united all the Palestinian factions, signed it, agreed to it as a way to recreate a credible, legitimate Palestinian government that represents all Palestinians, which is a critical first step both to negotiating a ceasefire and governing Palestine through a democratically elected government, which neither Fatah nor Hamas dominate. And it's a critical first step towards a permanent peace agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And the Palestinian people are fully behind this, but the situation hasn't moved. You have not had the full reconciliation among the Palestinian groups, mainly because Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the chairman of the PLO and the president of the Palestinian Authority, is not interested in it. He wants to hold on. He's 89 years old, I think, or 88. He wants to hold on to power, pass it on to his cronies, which he's just done by appointing a guy called Hussein al-Sheikh as his vice president. Hussein al-Sheikh has very little respect among Palestinians. He's seen as a kind of fixer, middleman with the Israelis, and he runs the bureaucracy of the PLO and its links with the PA and its links with Israel. And he's just been made vice president. So the power that Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, holds in the Palestinian political life is pretty strong, and nobody can challenge him.
So just on China, I just had a couple of points. China gets most of its oil, Middle East oil, from Iran, and has an interest in Iran functioning as an economic society and an oil exporting society. There have been reports very recently that China is considering selling advanced military aircraft to Iran. I don't know if they've been confirmed yet, but Iran effectively doesn't have an air force, which is one of the reasons why it's vulnerable to Israel. Whatever planes it has go back to the 1970s, the days of the Shah, U.S. airplanes. So if this is a true report, it could be a serious change in the sort of balance of forces in the Middle East. China has, advanced military aircraft as good as any in the world now. So that's something to watch out for.
And China already delivered to Iran anti-aircraft to help rebuild Iran's air defense system. So I think the Chinese will get a little bit more involved, but they will avoid at all costs, fighting the Americans. They don't want that to happen.
Great. Thank you both. Thank you especially to Rami, and thanks Jeff for adding in. So I'm gonna